Representative, please open.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of Judiciary. My name is Zoe Zephyr. That's Z-O-O-E-Y, Z-E-P-H-Y-R. I represent House District 95 out of Missoula, Montana, which is just south of the Clark Fork. It is the university itself and the surrounding areas, Slant Streets, Franklin to the Fort area. It is a joy to be in front of my own committee to present to you today House Bill 798. House Bill 798 is a proposed constitutional amendment to repeal the ban on same-sex marriage in the state of Montana. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this would function, the history, and why this bill is needed. And so, again, for those unfamiliar, this is a constitutional amendment. If we pass this out of the House and the Senate by a 2/3 majority, it winds up going to the voters of Montana to repeal, as a ballot initiative to overturn the ban on same-sex marriage. Montana has an interesting history when it comes to same-sex marriage in the state. You know, up until 1997, same-sex relationships were considered a felony in the state of Montana. That's why oftentimes there's an annual former felons ball that LGBTQ people celebrate, our love being acknowledged now and no longer being a felony in the state of Montana. I think that's an important place to start because it shows sort of how outdated the mode of thinking was back then. And I cannot, as someone who has my wife with me here today, I cannot imagine having to hide my relationships, having to hide my love of my wife, and that if I somehow revealed that love, that would be a felony. That's where we started. And, the 90s themselves, as we shifted into the new millennium, there was a lot of panic from the American populace around gay and lesbian relationships and about the prospect of marriage. And that led, in 2004, a constitutional amendment brought by the state of Montana. Montana was not alone in this. There were about 30 states that brought constitutional amendments to ban same-sex marriage. And if you polled the general public around same-sex marriage, it was about 1/3 of people in support of same-sex marriage and 2/3 opposed. That is a long time ago. That is over 2 decades ago where that was the story. And it's interesting because when those bills were brought up, we heard echoes of fears being brought up again and again. One of the fears that was brought up was, this, what do they call it? This vast, we must protect in the bill for the constitutional amendment. One of the reasons they gave for the ban on same-sex marriage was, quote, to protect the state and country from a vast, untested social experiment, is what they called our love. And they also made claims that it would hurt children. They made claims that if a child grew up in a household with 2 fathers or 2 mothers, that would somehow be detrimental to children. Well, I will tell you we are 2 decades past that, and I don't think that has borne out in any way, shape, or form. I'm a proud mother to my 9-year-old stepson and my wife who has taken care of him. And I think what we're left with here in 2014, when this provision of our state constitution was deemed in violation of the Equal Protection Clause, became no longer in effect, gay people could get married in the state. And so for the last decade, we have what I would call a vestigial and outdated piece of our state's constitution that looks at a subset of our population and says, there was a time where we thought these people were lesser. And I think we as a body at this point can say that that's not the case. And when I talk about the urgency of repealing something like this, I want to think about the message it sends. I have had the privilege of working alongside everyone in this committee. I've met several of your spouses and had wonderful conversations with them. And I know that you love them deeply And I know when you've had a chance to meet my spouse, you know that I love her deeply. I've watched the way people have raised families, and I hope you can look to me and say, I understand how she is raising a family with her wife, and that love itself is worthwhile, and we should not have a piece of our state constitution that somehow denigrates that type of love. You know, this has brought this session for me in particular because I was married in December in the county fairgrounds down in Missoula, Montana, the same building where I go for the county fair every year. It was cleaned up a little bit from when the pigs and cows and horses are in there. But that was a really special and beautiful moment. And I think, you know, I contrast the language around social experiments, around danger to children, etc., with the vows that I gave my wife. The vows to be gentle in my love, the vows to uplift her and her interests, the vows to be a good mother to our son. And it's important to note what marriage signifies and what it means. And I can't think of anything more crystallizing of that notion than when we left the wedding and I chatted with my stepson and I said, what was your favorite part of the wedding? And he said, my favorite part was when you and Mom kissed, because that's when you became my stepmom for real. And that is one of the happiest moments of my life, to have solidified and made formal the relationship, the parental relationship with my stepson. And the last thing I want to close with on that is contrasting my mother's experience with the wedding. My mother, I don't think I've told any of this, the folks in this committee, my mother's a lifelong Republican. And she went back to her conservative friends following the wedding and was asked, what was it like to be at an LGBTQ wedding? And she was like, oh, it was just like every other wedding I've ever been at, except it was my daughter up there. The love was the same. It was just as kind and just as sacred, but it was my daughter up there. I hope as the committee considers this bill, we recognize that this has already been deemed a violation of the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment through Obergefell, as well as some state cases, Rolando v. Fox that was going through before it got folded into Obergefell. This is already deemed a violation. What we are doing through this is we are acknowledging that this way of thinking, of deeming one type of love, the love I have with my family, as lesser than the type of love the rest of you have with your spouses, that is outdated. It is a relic of a crueler time, and it is about time the state move on and let that go.